In the beginning there was nothing. Not darkness, not emptiness, not silence. Those are all things. Before Genesis 1:1 there was not even the absence of something. There was no space for absence to occupy, no time for silence to fill, nothing that could be described by any word in any language, because every word in every language describes something that exists and nothing existed. And then God spoke, and everything that has ever been, every galaxy, every atom, every creature, every moment of human history, every word ever written, including the words you're hearing right now, everything began with that single act of divine speech. Genesis is the most important book ever written, not because of its literary quality, though it is extraordinary, not because of its historical influence, though it is unparalleled. It is the most important book ever written because it answers the questions that every other question depends on. Where did everything come from? Who are we? Why is everything broken? And is there any reason to believe it can be fixed? 50 chapters, 4 towering stories, one unbroken argument that runs from the first word to the last, and at the center of every story, not politics, not military conquest, not philosophical abstraction, a human heart. Doing what human hearts do, reaching for things they were not made to reach for, running from things they were not made to run from, and occasionally, against all probability, trusting something they could not see. Here is what most people never realize about Genesis. It is not primarily a book about origins, it is a book about relationship. The creation of the world in chapter 1 is not the point, it is the stage. The point is what happens between God and the creatures he made in his own image. What happens when trust breaks? What happens when the world that was made very good becomes a world of thorns and pain and flood and famine? And what happens when God refuses, against every reasonable expectation, to let the story end there? Stay with me, because Genesis is not ancient history. It is the story you're living in right now. And by the time we reach the last chapter, you will see why. The world of Genesis is ancient in a way that is almost impossible for modern minds to grasp. The earliest stories of Genesis, Adam, the flood, the Tower of Babel, exist in a time before written records, before organized civilization, before the political structures that gave human history its shape. Scholars date the composition of Genesis to somewhere between the 10th and 5th centuries BC, though the traditions it records are far older. The stories of the patriarchs, Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, Joseph, correspond broadly to what archaeologists call the Middle Bronze Age, roughly 2000 to 1550 BC. Here is the detail most people walk right past. Genesis was not written in a cultural vacuum. The ancient Near East was full of creation stories, flood stories, stories of gods and humans and the beginning of the world. The Babylonian Enuma Elish describes creation through a cosmic battle between gods. The Epic of Gilgamesh contains a flood narrative with remarkable parallels to the story of Noah. The Atrahasis epic describes humans being created to do the work the lesser gods refused to do. Genesis enters this world of competing narratives and makes claims that are quietly revolutionary on almost every page. In the Babylonian stories, the world is created through violence. The god Marduk splits the body of the chaos monster Tiamat in half to form the sky and the earth. In Genesis, creation happens through speech, God says, and it is. No battle, no violence, no chaos monster to be defeated, just the calm, sovereign, effortless creativity of a god who does not struggle to make things exist. In the Babylonian Atrahasis, epic humans are created to be slaves, to do the labor the gods find beneath them. In Genesis, humans are created in the image of God. The Hebrew phrase is Tselem Elohim, the image of God. In the ancient Near East, a Tselem was a statue placed in a temple or a conquered territory to represent the presence and authority of the king. To say that every human being is made in the image of God is to say that every human being is a representative of the divine king placed in the territory of creation, not slaves, vicegerents, royal stewards of a world that belongs to their maker. That single claim, that every human being bears the divine image, is the most radical statement in Genesis, and it has consequences that run through every story that follows. Adam and Eve are not primarily a story about the origin of sin. That is how they are usually read. The fall, the forbidden fruit, the expulsion from the garden, and all of that is there. But reading Genesis 2 and 3 only through the lens of the fall is like reading the first act of a play only to identify the villain. you miss everything the story is actually doing. Genesis 2 opens with a detail that should stop every reader in their tracks. God has created the heavens and the earth. He has spoken light and sky and land and sea and vegetation and stars and animals into existence. And then he does something he has not done in the act of creation up to this point. He gets his hands dirty. Genesis 2:7 says, "The Lord God formed the man of dust from the ground and breathed into his nostrils the breath of life, and the man became a living creature." The Hebrew verb translated formed is yatsar, the same word used for a potter shaping clay. God is not speaking Adam into existence from a distance. He is shaping him. The image is intimate, physical, tactile, in a way that the sweeping creation account of Genesis 1 is not. And then he breathes, directly into Adam's nostrils. The Hebrew word for breath here is nishmat, and the same word is used for the breath of God himself in Job 33:4. What animates Adam is the breath of God, not just biological life, shared breath, something of the divine life itself. Here is what most people never realize about the garden God places Adam in. Genesis 2:8 says God planted a garden in Eden, in the east. The Hebrew word for garden is gan, an enclosed space, a protected, cultivated area. The garden is not a wilderness. It is a place of order and beauty and provision deliberately created and deliberately given. And Adam is placed in it with a specific commission. Genesis 2:15. "The Lord God took the man and put him in the Garden of Eden to work it and keep it." The Hebrew words are avad and shamar. Avad means to work or to serve. Shamar means to keep, to guard, to watch over. These are not the words of a slave doing compulsory labor. They are the words of a steward entrusted with something precious. Adam is given responsibility, real responsibility. The garden is his to tend, his to protect, his to name and order and cultivate. And into this world of responsibility and provision and intimate relationship, one prohibition. 1. Genesis 2:16-17. "You may surely eat of every tree of the garden, but of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil you shall not eat, for in the day that you eat of it you shall surely die. Every tree, except one." The provision is overwhelming, the restriction is minimal, and the restriction itself is an act of love. Because a relationship without the possibility of refusal is not a relationship. It is a program. The tree of the knowledge of good and evil is not a trap. It is the space where love becomes real, the space where Adam and Eve can choose, and then the serpent arrives. Genesis 3:1 describes the serpent as more crafty than any other beast of the field that the Lord God had made. The Hebrew word for crafty is aram, and it carries the sense of shrewdness, cunning, the ability to manipulate a situation through language rather than force. The serpent does not threaten, he questions. Did God actually say, "You shall not eat of any tree in the garden"? Genesis 3:1. Notice the distortion. God said one tree. The serpent says any tree. It is a subtle misrepresentation, barely enough to notice, but it plants the seed. It introduces the possibility that God's instruction might be more restrictive than it actually is, that God might be withholding something. Eve corrects him. "We can eat of the trees, just not this one. We will die." And the serpent responds with the oldest lie in human history. "You will not surely die. For God knows that when you eat of it your eyes will be opened, and you will be like God, knowing good and evil." Genesis 3:4-5. Here is the detail that changes everything about this exchange. The serpent does not tell Eve that God is fictional. He does not argue that God is evil. He makes a much more subtle and much more destructive claim. He tells Eve that God is holding something back, that there is a version of life better than the one God has provided, that the restriction is not protection, it is limitation, that God does not want them to have what they could have. The Hebrew phrase for knowing good and evil is yada tov vara, and yada, as we have seen before, means to know experientially from the inside. The serpent is offering Eve not information about good and evil, but experience of it. The ability to determine for herself what is good and what is evil. Moral autonomy, the right to be her own standard. That is the temptation that has never changed. Not the apple, not the tree. The offer to be your own God, to make yourself the measure of what is right, to trust your own judgment over the word of the one who made you. Genesis 3:6 records what happens next with devastating economy of language. "So when the woman saw that the tree was good for food, and that it was a delight to the eyes, and that the tree was to be desired to make one wise, she took of its fruit and ate, and she also gave some to her husband who was with her, and he ate, and he ate. 4 words, the most consequential 4 words in human history, after the opening 4. Adam is there. He has been there the whole time. He hears the whole conversation, and when Eve eats, he does not intervene, he does not object, he just eats. Here is what most people never realize about Adam's failure in Genesis 3. His sin is not primarily the eating. His sin is the silence. He was given the commission to keep, Shema, the garden. He was standing beside the one who was being deceived, and he said nothing. The first human failure is not rebellion, it is abdication. The failure of a steward to do what stewards are supposed to do. And then their eyes are opened, and the first thing they see is themselves, and they are ashamed. Genesis 3:8 contains one of the most heartbreaking images in the entire Bible. They heard the sound of the Lord God walking in the garden in the cool of the day, and the man and his wife hid themselves from the presence of the Lord God among the trees of the garden. He is walking in the garden. In the cool of the day. The Hebrew phrase Ruach Hayom suggests the evening breeze, the time of day when the heat breaks and the air moves and everything becomes quiet and peaceful. This is apparently what God does. He walks in the garden in the evening. This is apparently what Adam and Eve did too, walked with him, in the cool of the day. And now they are hiding. The God who breathed his own breath into their nostrils is walking through the garden calling. Where are you, Genesis 3:9? He knows where they are. The question is not geographical, it is relational. Where are you in relation to me? What has happened to the thing we had? And it is the first question God asks a human being in the entire Bible, and it is the question that every story in Genesis and every story in the rest of the Bible was attempting to answer. The consequences come: pain in childbirth, toil in work, thorns and thistles. The ground that was a garden becomes a place of struggle, and they are expelled from the garden. An angel with a flaming sword stands at the entrance. The way back is closed. But before they leave, God does something that carries more meaning than most readers notice. Genesis 3:21. The Lord God made for Adam and for his wife garments of skins and clothed them. To make garments of skin, something has to die. This is the first death in the Bible. An animal, unnamed, uncelebrated, dies so that Adam and Eve can be covered. The shame that their sin produced requires a death to address. And God, the one they sinned against, is the one who provides the covering, not abandonment, provision, even in the expulsion, even in the judgment. The God who is asking, "Where are you?" is also the one making sure they are clothed before they go. Between Adam and Noah, the Bible records something that should shock modern readers more than it does. Genesis 6:5. The Lord saw that the wickedness of man was great in the earth, and that every intention of the thoughts of his heart was only evil continually. Every intention, only evil, continually. This is not an exaggeration for rhetorical effect. The Hebrew construction is emphatic and total. The text is describing a civilization that has reached a point of complete moral collapse. Genesis 6:11 adds that the earth was corrupt. The Hebrew word shakat means ruined, destroyed, spoiled, and filled with violence. The Hebrew word for violence is Hamas. Not a political term here, but a moral one describing the pervasive brutality of a world that has fully abandoned the image it was made to bear. And Genesis 6:6 records something that is one of the most theologically significant statements in the entire Old Testament. The Lord regretted that he had made man on the earth, and it grieved him to his heart. The Hebrew word for regretted is nacham, the same word we saw in Isaiah meaning comfort. In this direction it means to feel sorrow over something, to be moved with grief, and the word for grieved is atzab, to be pained, to suffer. This is not the language of a detached divine judge passing sentence. This is the language of a parent watching their child destroy themselves and being unable to stop it without overriding the freedom that makes love possible. God is not angry in Genesis 6. He is grieved. And into this world of total moral collapse, one man, Genesis 6:9, Noah was a righteous man, blameless in his generation. Noah walked with God. The Hebrew phrase blameless is tamim, complete, whole, without defect. It is the same word used for a sacrifice without blemish. and walked with God is the same phrase used for Enoch in Genesis 5:24. The man who walked with God and was not because God took him. To walk with God in Genesis is not a metaphor for religious observance. It is a description of ongoing intimate relationship. The same kind of relationship Adam and Eve had before the garden. Noah has maintained in a world of total corruption what most people cannot maintain when things are merely difficult. He walks with God. And God comes to him with the strangest assignment in the Bible: build a boat. The Hebrew word translated ark is tiba, and it appears only twice in the entire Bible. Here in Genesis 6 and in Exodus 2, where it describes the basket that Moses' mother places him in to float on the Nile. The same word for Noah's ark and the basket that saved Moses. Both vessels carry the hope of a people through water. Both are acts of desperate faith by people who have nothing left to work with but obedience. God gives Noah specific dimensions. Genesis 6:15. 300 cubits long, 50 cubits wide, 30 cubits high. A cubit is approximately 18 inches, making the ark roughly 450 feet long, 75 feet wide and 45 feet high. Naval engineers who have analysed these dimensions have noted that they represent a remarkably stable hull ratio. The proportions of a vessel, designed not for speed, but for surviving rough seas without capsizing. Here is what most people never realise about the Ark account. The text of Genesis does not record Noah arguing with God. It does not record him asking questions. Genesis 6:22 is the entire summary of Noah's response to the most extraordinary construction project in human history. Noah did this. He did all that God commanded him. That is it. No questions, no negotiation, no asking God to clarify whether he really meant it. In a world where every intention of every heart was only evil continually, one man simply did what God said. The rain begins in Genesis 7:11. The Hebrew is specific. The fountains of the great deep burst open, and the windows of the heavens were opened. This is not just rain from above. Something is happening beneath the earth as well. The primordial waters of Genesis 1:2, the deep that existed before creation was ordered, seem to be reasserting themselves. The ordered world is being unmade. For 40 days and 40 nights the rain falls, the waters rise, and everything outside the ark dies. Genesis 7:23 records it without sentimentality. He blotted out every living thing that was on the face of the ground, man and animals and creeping things and birds of the heavens. They were blotted out from the earth. Only Noah was left, and those who were with him in the ark. Only Noah was left, and then the waters begin to recede. Genesis 8:1 opens with one of the most important words in the entire flood narrative. But God remembered Noah. The Hebrew word zakar, remembered, does not mean that God had forgotten. God does not forget. Zakar means to act on behalf of someone, to turn your attention and intention toward them. God remembered Noah means God moved. He sent a wind over the earth and the waters began to subside. Think about what it felt like to be on that ark. 150 days of floating, no land visible, no horizon but water. The entire world you knew, every landmark, every road, every building, every face is gone. Just the sound of the water and the animals and the 8 people who were all that remained of humanity. And then the ark rests on the mountains of Ararat. And Noah sends out a raven, then a dove. The dove comes back, he sends it again. It comes back with an olive branch, he sends it a 3rd time. It does not return, and Noah knows. Genesis 8:15-16. God speaks to Noah, go out from the ark. The first thing Noah does when he steps onto dry ground is build an altar and offer a burnt offering. Genesis 8:21 records that God smelled the pleasing aroma. The Hebrew is reach nikoach, and said in his heart something that becomes the foundation of everything that follows. I will never again curse the ground because of man, even though the intention of man's heart is evil from his youth. Neither will I ever again strike down every living thing as I have done. Notice what God does not say. He does not say, I will never do this again because man has learned his lesson. He does not say, I will never do this again because the flood worked and now humanity is better. He says, even though the intention of man's heart is evil from his youth, the flood did not fix the human heart. God knew it would not. The problem of Genesis 6, the corruption that made the flood necessary, is still present. The 8 survivors carried it out of the ark with them, and God knows this, and decides to deal with it differently. He makes a covenant. The Hebrew word berit. The same binding agreement we saw in the Ten Commandments context, a rainbow in the cloud. Genesis 9:13. I have set my bow in the cloud, and it shall be a sign of the covenant between me and the earth. The Hebrew word for bow is keshet, the same word used for a warrior's bow. Some scholars have pointed out that a warrior hanging up his bow is an image of a warrior who has put down his weapons. The rainbow is God's bow hung in the sky, a sign not just of promise but of restraint, of a God who chooses to absorb the cost of human corruption rather than eliminate it. The flood ends, the world begins again, and the human heart, unchanged, still prone to the same reach for autonomy that started everything, walks off the ark into a second chance it did nothing to deserve. Genesis 11 records one more catastrophe before Abraham arrives, and it is the quietest catastrophe in the book, the Tower of Babel. Genesis 11:1-9. The whole earth has one language. People move eastward and settle in a plain in the land of Shinar, ancient Babylon, and they make a decision. They will build a city and a tower with its top in the heavens, and they say, "Let us make a name for ourselves, lest we be dispersed over the face of the whole earth." Genesis 11:4. Here is what most people never realize about Babel. The sin is not the construction project. The sin is the motivation. Let us make a name for ourselves. The Hebrew Shem, name, carries the sense of reputation, identity, significance. They want to secure their own significance, to build something tall enough to reach God, to make themselves so established that nothing can scatter them. It is the same reach that happened in the garden, the same impulse that made Adam eat and Noah's descendants build, the desire to secure through human effort what only God can provide. And God comes down, the Hebrew is ironic, almost sardonic. He has to come down to see this tower they have built reaching toward the heavens, and he scatters them, confuses their language. The city they built to keep themselves together becomes the place that pulls them apart. Babel. From the Hebrew Balal, to confuse, to mix up, the city built to make a name becomes the city that cannot even communicate. And it is out of this world of confusion and scattering and failed human ambition that God makes his next move. Abram is 75 years old when God speaks to him. He is living in Haran, in the upper Euphrates region of modern Turkey. Having originally come from Ur of the Chaldeans in southern Mesopotamia, he is not a young man with his whole life ahead of him. He is old. His wife Sarai is barren. They have no children, and they have no particular reason to expect anything different. And God says, Genesis 12:1-3, Go. Go from your country and your kindred and your father's house to the land that I will show you, and I will make of you a great nation, and I will bless you and make your name great so that you will be a blessing. Notice what God promises. A great nation, which requires descendants. A great name. The very thing the people of Babel tried to build for themselves and failed. And a blessing, not just for Abram and his family, but for all the families of the earth. Here is the contrast that reframes everything. The people of Babel tried to make a name for themselves and were scattered. God promises to make Abram's name great, and the condition is simply that Abram go where he is told without knowing where he is going. The Hebrew word for go is lesh lecha, and it is one of those constructions that does not translate fully into English. Lesh means go. Lecha means to yourself, for yourself, into yourself. It is a command to set out on a journey that is simultaneously geographical and interior. Go, and in the going, discover who you are. Hebrews 11:8, written 2,000 years later, describes what Abraham did in a single sentence that carries more weight than its length suggests. By faith Abraham obeyed when he was called to go out to a place that he was to receive as an inheritance, and he went out not knowing where he was going. Not knowing where he was going. That is the definition of faith in its purest form, not certainty about the destination. Trust in the one who said go. Abram arrives in Canaan. God appears to him and says, "To your offspring I will give this land." Abram builds an altar. He keeps moving. He goes to Egypt during a famine. He comes back. He and his nephew Lot separate because the land cannot support both their flocks. Lot chooses the well-watered plain towards Sodom. Abram takes what is left, and God comes to Abram again in Genesis 15, in a vision. And Abram says something that most people of faith have felt but few have said out loud. "O Lord God, what will you give me? For I continue childless, and the heir of my house is Eliezer of Damascus." Genesis 15:2. I continue childless. The promise of a great nation depends on descendants. Abram has none. He is getting older, Sarai is barren, and the gap between what God has promised and what Abram can see is getting wider, not narrower. God takes him outside. Look toward heaven and number the stars if you are able to number them. So shall your offspring be. Genesis 15:5, and then Genesis 15:6, one of the most important sentences in the entire Bible. And he believed the Lord, and he counted it to him as righteousness. The Hebrew word for believed is amen, from which we get the word amen. It means to be firm, to be established, to lean your full weight on something. And the word for righteousness is tzedakah, right standing, the condition of being in right relationship. Abraham does not earn right standing with God through religious performance or moral achievement. He believes a promise he cannot verify, and God counts that, the belief itself, as righteousness. Paul quotes this verse in Romans 4:3 and Galatians 3:6. James quotes it in James 2:23. It is one of the most cross-referenced verses in the entire New Testament, because what happens between God and Abraham in Genesis 15 is the foundation of everything that comes after. But God is not finished. He makes a covenant with Abraham, and the ritual he uses is one of the most striking in the ancient Near East, Genesis 15:9-10. God instructs Abraham to bring a heifer, a goat, a ram, a turtle dove, and a young pigeon. Abraham cuts the animals in half and arranges the halves opposite each other. This is the ancient covenant ritual known as cutting a covenant. The Hebrew karet beret literally means to cut a covenant. The parties to the agreement would walk between the two halves of the slaughtered animals, the symbolism being, may what happen to these animals happen to me if I break this covenant. Abraham arranges the animals and waits. Birds of prey come and he drives them away. And then Genesis 15:12. A deep sleep falls on Abraham. The Hebrew Tardama is the same word used for the deep sleep that fell on Adam before Eve was created. And a dreadful and great darkness falls, and God speaks the future. 400 years of slavery in Egypt, then Exodus, then return to this land, and then Genesis 15:17. When the sun had gone down and it was dark, behold, a smoking firepot and a flaming torch passed between these pieces. A smoking firepot and a flaming torch, ancient symbols of divine presence. God passes between the pieces, alone, without Abraham. In an ancient covenant ceremony, both parties walked between the animals. Here only God walks. He is making a unilateral commitment. He is saying, if this covenant is broken, may what happened to these animals happen to me. Think about what that means for a second. God is binding himself to the consequences of a covenant that he knows, he already knows, Abraham's descendants will break. He is making a promise and taking on himself the penalty for the failure of the people he is making the promise to. That promise will take 2,000 years to fulfill. It will be fulfilled on a hill outside Jerusalem by someone who descends from Abraham, but it is made here, in the dark, with a sleeping old man and a firepot passing between the pieces of slaughtered animals. The covenant is not conditional on Abraham's faithfulness. It is conditional on God's. The years pass. The promised child does not come. Sarai, who is now Sarah, whose name God changes as he changes Abram's to Abraham in Genesis 17, comes to Abraham with a proposal. She has an Egyptian servant named Hagar. Take her as a wife. Have the child through her. Perhaps God's promise can be fulfilled this way. Abraham agrees, and Hagar conceives and bears a son, Ishmael. Here is what most people never realize about the Hagar and Ishmael account. It is not a story of cruelty or rejection. It is a story of impatience and its consequences. Abraham and Sarah are not wicked people. They are old people who have been waiting for a promise for years and have decided to help it along. The impulse is understandable. The result is a complexity that echoes through human history to the present day. God does not abandon Ishmael. Genesis 16:11-12 records that the angel of the Lord appears to Hagar and names the child and promises that he too will father a great nation. Genesis 21:20 records that God was with Ishmael as he grew. Ishmael is not cast outside the care of God. He is simply not the child of the promise. Isaac is. And Isaac comes in Genesis 21. Abraham is 100 years old, Sarah is 90, and Sarah laughs. Genesis 21:6. God has made laughter for me. Everyone who hears will laugh over me. The Hebrew name Yitzhak, Isaac, means he laughs. The child of the promise is named after the laughter of a woman who laughed at the promise because it seemed impossible. And God made the impossible thing happen and named the evidence after the laughter. Not despite the laughter, because of it. because when everything is impossible and the promise still comes through, laughter is the only appropriate response. And then Genesis 22, the chapter that towers over everything that came before it in the Abraham story. God speaks to Abraham again, "Take your son, your only son Isaac, whom you love, and go to the land of Moriah, and offer him there as a burnt offering on one of the mountains of which I shall tell you." Genesis 22.2. The accumulation of descriptions in that command is deliberate and devastating. Your son, your only son, whom you love, Isaac. Every word adds weight. God is not letting Abraham minimize what is being asked. He is naming the thing in its full significance before asking Abraham to give it up. Here is what most people never realize about Genesis 22. The narrative tells us it is a test in verse 1. The reader knows. Abraham does not. He simply gets up early in the morning, Genesis 22. 3 records this detail, and sets out. The journey takes 3 days. 3 days of walking toward a mountain where Abraham intends to kill his son. 3 days of whatever conversation passed between them. 3 days of whatever happened inside Abraham's heart. And then Isaac asks the question that should break every reader. "Behold the fire and the wood, but where is the lamb for a burnt offering?" Genesis 22:7. And Abraham answers with words that the New Testament will eventually recognize as prophecy. God will provide for himself the lamb. Genesis 22:8. The Hebrew is Elohim Yireh Lo Haseh. God will see to the lamb for himself. The mountain they are climbing will later be called Yahweh Yireh. The Lord will provide. The same mountain where Abraham says God will see to it is the mountain where, according to 2 Chronicles 3:1, Solomon will build the temple. And according to Jewish and Christian tradition, it is the same hill, or very close to it, where another sacrifice will take place 2,000 years later. Abraham binds Isaac, lays him on the altar, raises the knife, and the angel of the Lord calls from heaven, "Abraham, Abraham." The repetition of the name in Hebrew carries urgency, the same double calling used when God speaks to Moses from the burning bush in Exodus 3:4. "Stop. Do not lay your hand on the boy, for now I know that you fear God, seeing you have not withheld your son, your only son, from me." And Abraham looks up and sees a ram caught in a thicket by its horns, and offers it instead of his son. Here is the theological weight of what just happened. God tested Abraham with the ultimate demand, the life of the promised child, and then provided the substitute himself. The ram in the thicket dies in Isaac's place. A father watches his son be spared because something else takes the death that was coming. The pattern that started in Genesis 3, when God clothed Adam and Eve with skins and something died to cover their shame, runs through the ram on Moriah and will eventually arrive at a hill not far from this same mountain. The pattern is consistent. The substitute is always provided by God. The covering is always divine. The cost is always paid by something or someone who did not have to pay it. If this is helping you see Genesis in a way you have never seen it before, help someone else find it. Subscribe, leave a comment. Even one word in the comments helps other people find this conversation. And share it with someone who has never read Genesis all the way through and does not know what they are missing. That is genuinely how people find this content. Jacob is the son of Isaac and the grandson of Abraham, and he is one of the most complicated characters in the entire Bible. He is born grasping the heel of his twin brother Esau. The Hebrew word for heel is arkev, and it gives Jacob his name, Yaakov, the heel grabber, the one who takes hold of what belongs to someone else, and from the moment of his birth the name is prophetic. He tricks Esau out of his birthright, the inheritance rights of the firstborn, in exchange for a bowl of lentil stew. He tricks his father Isaac, who is old and nearly blind, into giving him the blessing meant for Esau by wearing goat skin on his arms to simulate Esau's hairiness. He is, by almost any definition, a deceiver, a man who gets what he wants through manipulation and cunning rather than honest dealing, and yet God chooses him. Genesis 28 records a moment that makes the choice comprehensible. Jacob is fleeing from Esau, who understandably wants to kill him, heading toward his uncle Laban in Haran. He stops for the night in a place he does not know the name of. He lies down with a stone for a pillow, and he dreams, a ladder, or stairway, reaching from earth to heaven, angels ascending and descending, and God standing above it saying, "I am the Lord, the God of Abraham your father and the God of Isaac. The land on which you lie I will give to you and to your offspring," Genesis 28:13. And then, "Behold, I am with you, and will keep you wherever you go and will bring you back to this land. For I will not leave you until I have done what I have promised you. Genesis 28:15. Jacob wakes up and his response is not worship. Not immediately, it is fear. How awesome is this place? This is none other than the house of God, and this is the gate of heaven. Genesis 28:17. He names the place Bethel, the house of God, and then he makes a deal. Genesis 28:20-21. If God will be with me, and will keep me in this way that I go, and will give me bread to eat and clothing to wear, so that I come again to my father's house in peace, then the Lord shall be my God. Here is what most people never realize about Jacob's vow at Bethel. It is transactional. Even in this moment of divine encounter, the ladder, the angels, the voice of God, Jacob is negotiating. If you do this for me, then you will be my God. The heel grabber is still grabbing, still trying to get the deal on his own terms, and God works with him anyway, for 20 years. Through Laban, who is a trickster to match Jacob's own trickery, giving him Leah instead of Rachel on his wedding night, making him work 14 years for the wife he wanted. Through the complicated, painful, funny, exhausting mess of Jacob's family life. 2 wives, 2 concubines, 12 sons, 1 daughter. Through gradual, decades-long formation of a man who started as a heel grabber and ends as something different. The transformation comes in Genesis 32. Jacob is returning to Canaan after 20 years. He's about to meet Esau, the brother he defrauded, the brother who wanted to kill him. He has sent gifts ahead, divided his family and flocks into groups, done everything a man of his particular skill set would do to manage the situation, and he is alone, left alone beside the ford of the Jabbok, and a man wrestles with him until daybreak. Genesis 32:24. A man, not an angel, not God, a man. But as the account unfolds, it becomes clear this is no ordinary encounter. Jacob wrestles all night. The man touches Jacob's hip socket and it is wrenched, and still Jacob will not let go. Let me go, for the day has broken. I will not let you go unless you bless me. And the man asks, "What is your name?" The question echoes Genesis 27, when Isaac asked Jacob his name before giving the blessing, and Jacob lied. "What is your name?" And Jacob, here at the Jabbok, after a night of wrestling, tells the truth. Jacob, I am Jacob, the heel grabber, the deceiver, the man who got everything through cunning and manipulation. That is my name. That is who I am. And the man says, "Your name shall no longer be called Jacob, but Israel, for you have striven with God and with men and have prevailed." Genesis 32:28. Israel. The Hebrew Yisrael means one who strives with God, or God strives. The etymology is debated, but the meaning is clear. The man who spent his whole life grabbing for what he wanted, who deceived his way to blessings that should have been someone else's, has finally stopped grabbing and started holding on. And what he is holding on to is not a deal or an advantage or someone's heel. He is holding on to God, refusing to let go without a blessing. Jacob walks away from the Jabbok with a limp. He has been permanently marked by the encounter, and he names the place Peniel, the face of God, because he has seen God face to face and his life has been preserved. The limp is not a punishment. It is a reminder. Every step Jacob takes for the rest of his life will carry the memory of the night he wrestled with God and would not let go. Every step will tell the story of a man who started as a deceiver and was renamed Israel. The 12 sons of Israel, from whom the 12 tribes take their name, are born into this complicated, wrestling, limping, choosing family, and the last of them, the one the story of Genesis will spend its final 13 chapters following, is Joseph. Joseph is Jacob's 11th son, the first son of his beloved wife Rachel, and Genesis 37:3 records the detail that sets everything in motion. Israel loved Joseph more than any other of his sons because he was the son of his old age, and he made him a robe of many colours. The Hebrew kitanet pasim, a robe of many colours, or more accurately a long robe with sleeves, is a garment of distinction. In the ancient world it marked someone who did not do manual labour. While his brothers were in the fields, this robe said, "This one is different. This one is favoured." His brothers hated him, and the text is not shy about why. They hated him and could not speak peacefully to him. Genesis 37:4. And then Joseph has a dream. 2 dreams, actually. In the first, his brothers' sheaves of grain bow down to his. In the second, the sun and moon and 11 stars bow down to him, and Joseph, 17 years old, wearing his special robe, already his father's favourite, tells his brothers both dreams. Here is what most people never realize about young Joseph. He is not presented as purely innocent in this part of the story. Genesis 37, 2 records that he brought a bad report of his brothers to their father. He is the favourite son and he knows it. He tells his brothers that they will bow down to him and seems entirely unconscious of how that lands. The dreams are from God. They will prove true. But Joseph's delivery of them at 17 lacks wisdom. He is gifted. He is favoured. And he has not yet become the man the dreams are describing. His brothers see him coming in the field, and they conspire. The original plan is to kill him. Reuben, the eldest, suggests throwing him into a pit instead, intending to rescue him later. And then a caravan of Ishmaelite traders comes by on their way to Egypt. And Judah, the fourth brother, makes the suggestion that changes everything. What profit is it if we kill our brother and conceal his blood? Come, let us sell him to the Ishmaelites, and let not our hand be upon him. Genesis 37, 26-27. They sell their brother for 20 pieces of silver, and they take his robe, the robe that marked him as favoured, and dip it in goat's blood, and bring it to their father. And Jacob tears his clothes and mourns for his son whom he believes is dead. Joseph arrives in Egypt as a slave, and here is the sentence that carries the entire rest of the story. Genesis 39.2. The Lord was with Joseph. 4 words. The Lord was with Joseph. He has been sold by his brothers. He is a slave in a foreign country. He is thousands of miles from his father. Everything that defined his life, the robe, the family, the favour, is gone. And the Lord was with Joseph. He ends up in the house of Potiphar, the captain of Pharaoh's guard, and he rises. Potiphar sees that the Lord is with him, and that the Lord causes all that he does to succeed. He makes Joseph overseer of his house. He puts everything he has in Joseph's charge, and then Potiphar's wife. Day after day she tries to seduce Joseph. Day after day he refuses. Genesis 39:9 records Joseph's reason. How then can I do this great wickedness and sin against God? Not, I will be caught. Not, it is not worth the risk. Sin against God. Joseph's ethics are not pragmatic. They are theological. And when Potiphar's wife finally grabs his garment, another piece of clothing that will be used against him, and he runs, leaving it in her hand, she uses it to accuse him. And Joseph goes to prison, Genesis 39:21. But the Lord was with Joseph and showed him steadfast love and gave him favour in the sight of the keeper of the prison. Again, the Lord was with Joseph, prison now instead of slavery, lower than before, and still the same 4 words. Whatever Joseph's external circumstances do, descend, worsen, become more unjust, those 4 words do not change. In prison, Joseph meets 2 of Pharaoh's officials, the cupbearer and the baker. Both have dreams. Joseph interprets them. The cupbearer will be restored in 3 days. The baker will be executed in 3 days. Both come true exactly as Joseph said. And Joseph asks the cupbearer one thing. Remember me. Mention me to Pharaoh. Get me out of this place. Genesis 40:23. Yet the chief cupbearer did not remember Joseph but forgot him. 2 more years pass. 2 years of Joseph in prison after the cupbearer forgets him. The delay in the story is not an accident. Genesis is showing us something about the kind of man Joseph is becoming in the waiting. The 17-year-old who told his brothers about his dreams without apparent awareness of how it sounded is not the same man who will stand before Pharaoh. The years in Potiphar's house, the years in prison, the forgotten promise of the cupbearer, all of it is forming something in Joseph that the robe and the favour could not have formed. And then Pharaoh has a dream. 2 dreams. 7 fat cows devoured by 7 thin cows. 7 healthy heads of grain swallowed by 7 thin and blighted heads of grain, and none of his magicians or wise men can interpret them. And the cupbearer remembers. Genesis 41:9. I remember my offences today. Joseph is brought from the prison. He is 30 years old, 13 years after his brothers threw him in the pit. And Pharaoh tells him the dreams. Joseph interprets them without hesitation. 7 years of abundance followed by 7 years of severe famine. And then, without being asked, he advises Pharaoh on what to do about it. Find a discerning and wise man and set him over the land. appoint overseers, collect a fifth of the produce during the good years, store it for the famine years. And Pharaoh looks at his officials and says, "Can we find a man like this in whom is the Spirit of God?" Genesis 41:38. He appoints Joseph as second in command over all of Egypt. He gives him his signet ring, fine linen, a gold chain, a chariot, a new name, Zaphanath-Paneah, a wife, Asenath the daughter of the Egyptian priest of On. Everything that was stripped from Joseph, his robe, his freedom, his identity, his future, is restored, and more than restored. The 7 years of abundance come. Joseph stores grain like sand of the sea. The 7 years of famine come, and the famine is not just in Egypt, it is over all the face of the earth. Genesis 41:57. All the earth came to Egypt to Joseph to buy grain because the famine was severe over all the earth. All the earth, including Canaan, including the region where an old man named Jacob is watching his household run out of food and sending his sons to Egypt to buy grain, 10 of them. He keeps Benjamin, Joseph's younger brother and Rachel's other son, at home. He cannot risk losing another son of Rachel. The 10 brothers arrive in Egypt and bow before the Egyptian official in charge of the grain. Genesis 42:6. Joseph's brothers came and bowed themselves before him with their faces to the ground. The dream from Genesis 37. The sheaves bowing down, the 11 stars. 20 years later, in the last place anyone expected, the brothers are bowing, not to the 17-year-old boy in the special robe, to the most powerful official in the most powerful nation on earth. In fulfillment of a dream they tried to kill, Joseph recognizes them immediately. They do not recognize him. He's dressed as an Egyptian, speaking Egyptian through an interpreter, ruling Egypt. The gap between what they expect and what is standing in front of them is too wide to bridge. He speaks roughly to them, accuses them of being spies, puts them in custody for 3 days, releases them with the condition that they return with Benjamin, and keeps Simeon as a hostage, and turns away from them and weeps. Genesis 42:21. While they are talking among themselves, not knowing Joseph understands them, the brothers say to each other, "In truth we are guilty concerning our brother in that we saw the distress of his soul when he begged us, and we did not listen. That is why this distress has come upon us. 20 years, and they still carry it. The guilt has not faded. The man they threw in a pit and sold for 20 pieces of silver. They can still see his face, still hear his voice begging them. The process is long and complex." The brothers return to Jacob. Jacob refuses to let Benjamin go. The famine gets worse. Finally, Jacob relents. They return to Egypt with Benjamin. Joseph sees Benjamin and has to leave the room to weep again. He tests them one more time, has his silver cup hidden in Benjamin's sack, has them brought back as thieves, tells them Benjamin must stay as his slave, the rest can go free. And Judah, the brother who suggested selling Joseph in the first place, steps forward and makes a speech that is one of the most remarkable acts of character transformation in Genesis. Genesis 44:33-34. "Now therefore, please let your servant remain instead of the boy as a servant to my lord, and let the boy go back with his brothers. For how can I go back to my father if the boy is not with me? I fear to see the evil that would find my father. Judah, who traded his brother for silver, is now offering himself as a slave to save his father's pain. The man who could not speak peacefully to Joseph 20 years ago is offering his own freedom for his youngest brother. The transformation is complete, and Joseph cannot contain himself any longer." Genesis 45:1-3. Then Joseph could not control himself before all those who stood by him. He cried, "Make everyone go out from me." So no one stayed with him when Joseph made himself known to his brothers, and he wept aloud so that the Egyptians heard it, and the household of Pharaoh heard it. And Joseph said to his brothers, "I am Joseph. Is my father still alive? I am Joseph." In all of literature, not just the Bible, all of literature, there is no more dramatic self-revelation. The most powerful man in Egypt, the second in command to Pharaoh, the man who has held their fate in his hands, the interpreter of dreams, the saver of nations. "I am Joseph, your brother, the one you sold." The brothers cannot answer him. They are dismayed before him. The Hebrew Baal means terrified, disturbed, overwhelmed. The reckoning they must have feared for 20 years is happening. The brother they threw in a pit is looking at them, and he is the most powerful man they have ever stood in front of. And Joseph says, "Come near to me," Genesis 45:4, "Come near," not, you will answer for what you did. Not, now you will see what it feels like. Not any of the things a man who had endured what Joseph endured might reasonably say. Come near. And then Genesis 45:5, one of the most extraordinary sentences in the entire Bible. And now do not be distressed or angry with yourselves because you sold me here, for God sent me before you to preserve life. God sent me, not you sold me, not you did this terrible thing. God sent me. The same event, the same brothers, the same pit, the same 20 pieces of silver. And Joseph sees it from a completely different angle. Not the angle of the victim, the angle of the purpose. Genesis 50:20. After their father Jacob dies, and the brothers fear Joseph will finally take his revenge. Joseph says the words that are the theological heart of the entire book of Genesis. As for you, you meant evil against me, but God meant it for good, to bring it about that many people should be kept alive as I am doing today. You meant evil. God meant good. Same event. Two different intentions operating simultaneously through the same circumstances. The brothers' cruelty and God's purpose running in parallel through the same pit, the same slave caravan, the same prison, the same forgotten promise of the cupbearer, the same 7 years of famine. Here is what most people never realize about Genesis 50:20. It is not a minimization of what happened to Joseph. He does not say, it was not really that bad, or you did not really mean evil. He acknowledges both things fully. You meant evil. God meant good. Both are true at the same time. The evil is real. The purpose running through it is also real. And the purpose does not cancel the evil, and it redeems it. Here is where every thread converges. Genesis begins with God breathing life into a creature made of dust. It ends with Joseph, the son of Abraham's grandson, the child of the promise, dying in Egypt and making his brothers swear to carry his bones home when God brings them back to the land. Genesis 50:24-25. Joseph said to his brothers, I am about to die, but God will visit you and bring you up out of this land to the land that he swore to Abraham, to Isaac, and to Jacob. Then Joseph made the sons of Israel swear, saying, God will surely visit you, and you shall carry up my bones from here. He is dying in Egypt, and he is still talking about the promise, the land, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, the covenant that a smoking firepot sealed between the halves of slaughtered animals in the dark. He is not in the land of promise. He cannot see how the descendants of Jacob, 70 people who came to Egypt in a famine, become the great nation God promised Abraham, but he believes it, and he makes them swear. The last image of Genesis is a coffin in Egypt, but the last word of Genesis is a promise still alive in the coffin. Here is the deepest thing Genesis teaches. The book opens with creation and closes with a coffin. It begins with a garden and ends with Egypt. It starts with everything very good and arrives at 400 years of slavery about to begin. By any measure of narrative satisfaction, this is not a conclusion. It is a setup. But that is exactly the point. Genesis is not trying to resolve everything. It is trying to establish the pattern that everything else will work within. God makes, humans choose, trust breaks. The gap between what God intended and what human choices produce widens until it seems unbridgeable. And God, instead of walking away and doubles down, makes a covenant, provides a substitute, stays with the one who is in the pit, works through the cruelty of brothers and the forgetfulness of cupbearers and the dreams of pharaohs to accomplish a purpose that the people inside the story cannot see. That pattern, established in 50 chapters across 4 towering stories, is the pattern the rest of the Bible is working within. The Exodus is Genesis continued. The Psalms are Genesis set to music. The prophets are Genesis diagnosed. And the New Testament is Genesis fulfilled. The seed of the woman crushing the serpent's head, the ram on Moriah replaced by a lamb, the you meant evil, but God meant good of Joseph's story played out at a scale that covers every human story that has ever been lived. You're not outside this story, you're inside it. The same God who breathed into Adam's nostrils, who walked in the garden in the cool of the day, who passed between the pieces in the dark, who was with Joseph in the pit and the prison and the palace, that God is the one asking you the same question he asked in the garden. Where are you? Not geographically, relationally. Where are you in relation to the one who made you? And the answer Genesis gives, the answer that runs from Adam to Noah to Abraham to Joseph, is that no matter how far the distance has grown, no matter how long the famine has lasted, no matter how many years have passed in the pit, the God who started this story has never stopped meaning it for good. The coffin in Egypt is not the end. Joseph knew it. He made them swear. The bones will come home, and they did. If this study meant something to you, if Genesis landed differently today than it ever has before, the single most helpful thing you can do is subscribe. Every video on this channel goes this deeply into the text, the language, and the people who make the Bible the most extraordinary document ever written. Leave a comment. It can be just one word. Even a single word in the comments helps other people find this conversation. And there are people out there who think Genesis is a book about science versus religion who have never seen what we looked at today. Share it with someone who has never read the Bible and does not know where to start. Share it with someone who grew up in church and thinks they already know these stories. Share it with someone who is in their own pit right now and needs to hear that the Lord was with Joseph and has not stopped being with people in pits since. God bless you, and please keep us in your prayers.